We're on Daf Ayin Ches, on the top of the Omud, and we got up to Tenach. Now, the word Tenach, you'll see 10 lines down from the top of Ayin Ches, is bracketed. So we're not sure if that's a correct girsa. Could be that the correct girsa begins with the word Shabbos. In any event, we mentioned back on Daf Ayin Zayin of Beis that there are certain situations in which you're allowed to cross the water up to your neck on Yom Kippurim for the sake of being Makabel Pnei Rabo, or possibly even the Rav being Makabel Pnei Talmido. And now the Gemara wants to know, what is the nature of this Isur that we're allowing you to violate, so to speak? Is it just an Isur of Yom Kippur, meaning of Inui, which is unique to Yom Kippur in its comparison to Shabbos? Shabbos has no Inui. Or is it that prohibition that's common to both Yom Kippurim and Shabbos? And that although there's no Inui on Shabbos, but nevertheless, you're not allowed to go into water on Shabbos. Now, let me add another important introduction to this Gemara that we're going to learn. When we talk about Inui and going into water on Yom Kippur, we were talking about the Isur Rechitza. Is that correct? What about the Isur of Ne'ilas HaSandal? Will he take off his shoes when he goes into the water? The Gemara says that Shabbos Ika Minol Mai. Now, with regard to Shabbos, there's a halacha called Malbush. In the context of Meleches Hotzah, if a person is carrying something on his body which covers his body, or he's wearing something on his feet to cover his feet, that's not considered Hotzah. That's not Masli. He's not carrying it. He's wearing it. And the Gemara wants to know, if a person is wearing shoes on Shabbos and he's going into the water, is that considered a malbush? And in many, many sugyas in the Masechet Shabbos, we don't allow him to wear something that's attached to his body if we're afraid that it might fall off his body and he might be tempted to carry it. You know, during this Corona period, there was a whole suffix, if there's no Eruv, are you allowed to wear a mask in the streets? Because wearing a mask is not necessarily a malbush, and we might be afraid that if the mask falls off, he might come to carry it in a Rosh Hashanah, which is a violation, as you know, of an Isur Skila. So I'm just using that as an example of Saber Sa'oz. And the Gemara is saying that maybe here, in the case of a person who's going through water and he's wearing shoes, we should be suspicious that maybe because he's passing through the water, the shoe may fall off. Like the water will, if the shoe is not tied down, with iron chains, the water might cause the shoe to fall off, separated from his foot, and he might carry it in Rishus Harabim. Okay. Now, the words that are in brackets, Enach Yoma Kippurim, Dileka Mino. And if I take this Gemara literally, if this Girsa is correct, then it means that when he goes down to the water on Yom Kippur, let's say it wasn't Shabbos, and we're allowing him to go into the water, he's not going to be wearing his shoes. And therefore, we don't have to worry about Meleches Hotzah. He's not going to be carrying his shoes because he's not wearing shoes. He's not allowed to wear shoes. But on Shabbos, if we let him go through the water, and there's no Isser of Ne'ilas HaSandal on Shabbos, then can we allow him to go into the water with his shoes on his feet? He may end up carrying his shoes. And the Gemara says, Amar Rab Nechemia Chasnei de Beinesiya, Anoch Hazisei LeRabbi Ami v'Rav Asi de Motu LeUrkama de Maya, the Avrua Derech Malbush. Derech Malbush means they went through the water. Avrua, they went through the water while they were wearing their shoes. That's called Derech Malbush. You see clearly that you're allowed to go through the water on Shabbos while you're wearing your shoes. And we're not afraid that he might lose his shoes and carry, fall off and they'll carry. Yesh lahakshos. Me'achar b'sugyasenu medubar be'over benor halo adin linyan Shabbosu shayom v'anor sheyesh be'omkom asar tfachim nechshav ha'avir shevi'al hamayim ad gova asar tfachim v'karnos. Ha'isa l'taltal sham eno ela min rabbana. He says, "Kan medubar ba'amukim yosef me'asarat tfachim," and therefore the airspace on top of the water has the status of a camelus. Is madua gozru kan shema yotzi hagezu gzera l'gzera. I don't get it. Why does Gemara assume, in the Hamamim at least, that he's not allowed to go into the water with his shoes? If the water has the status of a camelus, then in the worst case scenario, he'll be carrying his shoes through a camelus. We don't know that he's going to do that, but we're afraid. So you want to introduce a gzera that he might come to carry his shoes where? In a camelus? Camelus itself is a gzera. In other words, the airspace above water cannot be considered a Rishus Harabim. Rishus Harabim is an area which is comfortable to travel through. We don't normally walk through water. So the airspace on top of the water has the status of a caramelist. That itself is a gzera. It's not a rishus harabim doraisa. And now you're afraid that maybe he'll take off his shoes and he'll carry them. That would be what's called a gzera l'gzera. A gzera built on top of another gzera. Klomar, gzera lesar lavar b'mino shemi yipol miraglo v'yitetenu. The afin yitiltenu alo atiltu v'komos elu enu asurim elu mishum gzeres chacham. Kosav anachas Yoshua, the Sofek HaGemara kan, Eino al divrei HaBraisa liel over at Savoro b'mayim, el Sofek b'fnei atzmi, v'duba al Rakak, Rishus HaRab, a very small pond, so to speak, of water. Maybe pond is not a good word. What would you call in English or in Spanish, a little bit of an indentation in the ground that's filled with water. The rains sort of piled up. In Hebrew, it's called a shlulit. You can look it up in Google how to say shlulit in English. Not a pond. I think there's a better word for
it. A pool, no?
Pool. Okay, let's call it a pool. But it's again a very shallow pool, and you can walk through it. And it has the status of Rishus Harab. That's how the Nachal Yoshua learns our Sugi. So the Gemara is still vacillating about this issue. Tenach, I understand that he's allowed to go through the water on Shabbos while he's wearing his shoes. And that means he can tie them down tightly to his shoes and make sure they don't fall. They don't fall off his feet, even though he's going through the water. And therefore, we don't have a gzera of maybe he'll be metaltel because we assume he tied his shoes tightly. But sandal, a sandal, you can't tie down in a tight way. It's really just straps that go around the leg. Michael Meimar, I'm still in the dark. Would we allow him on Shabbos to go through this shlulis while he's wearing his sandals? Rav Ashi Omar, Omar Richumi, Anoch Hazisi, L'Ravino di over derech Malbush. And apparently he was wearing a sandal. I don't know why the Gemara doesn't emphasize that. In any event, it's clear from Ravina that you're allowed to go through water on Shabbos with a sandal on your feet. And we're not afraid that he might come to, if the sandal falls off, he might come to carry it. Rav Ashi disagrees, and he says, sandal lechatchila lo. He should not be passing through the water wearing a sandal. Because as we said before, it's not tied down tightly. We're afraid it might fall and he'll come to carry it in Rosh Hashanah. But why does it say lechatchila lo yav? That's why I don't understand the language of lechatchila. He says here, Bibir divrei Rabbi Ashi, she'omar lechatchila lo, re'ei b'toras Menachem, shebir sha'kavonas lechatchila kodem sheyotzo sheyetze laderech, v'yodea sheyesham mayim, Oh, I see. So the difference between Lechatchila and B'di'eved, says the Torah's Menachem, is that he has to decide what he should be wearing on his feet when he heads out to meet his Rebbe and he knows he's going to have to go through the water. At that point, he should put on shoes and switch shoes for his sandalim, according to Rav Ashi, because we're afraid that in the water the sandal will fall off, etc., etc. However, let's say he went already out b'derech. He's on the road and he's wearing sandalim. In such a case, even Rav Ashi would allow him to go through the water while he's wearing sandalim. We're not going to expect him to go all the way back home, retrace his steps on a long journey, and switch from sandalim into regular shoes. With the evidence for Yotza B'derech, oh, Shechoshav Sheyastik Lavar B'mayim Kodem Shabbos. Oh, it's on Erev Shabbos, and he's looking at his watch, and he thinks he'll get over the water by the time sunset, the sun sets. Is then, if he's wearing sandalim, and it's not that he was trying to be rebellious, he didn't realize that he'll be wearing his sandalim, he won't be able to take them off before he gets to the water, then b'di'eved he's allowed to walk into the water with his sandalim. Reish Galusa. Now we have a story about the Exeliarch, right, the head of the Gola. Ikla leHagronoya. He found himself on Shabbos in a place called Hagronoya. Probably was Hungarian, I don't know. Lebei Rav Nasa. Rafram Bekuli Rabbanon Asu Lepirka. Now, the Zeresh Galusa, when he came to a city or town for Shabbos, he would give a drasha. He was, after all, the spiritual leader of the entire Golus. And Rabbi Nassan, together with Rafram and all the rabbis, they went to hear his drasha, the drasha of the Reish Galusa. Ravina lo asa, Ravina refused to go. Lemachar, and on Sunday, boy Rafram lafuke leRavina midaite the Reish Galusa. Rafram wanted to make sure that the Reish Galusa was not holding a grudge in his heart against Ravina because Ravina failed to show up for the drasha. Therefore, Amar Le, I'm just going to have to do something technical here, sorry. Amar Le, so Rafram asks Ravina in the presence of the Reish Galusa, my time why didn't you show up for the drasha? Amar Le, Ravina responded to Rafram, Havi koivli kare. My legs were hurting. I couldn't walk. So now, basically, Ravina is excusing himself as to why he didn't show up for the drasha, because he was ill. And he didn't mean any insult to the Reish Galusa. Rafram said, if you have you have some warts or I don't know some cuts on your foot, is he boilach lemesach misonet? Why didn't you put on shoes? And Ravina says, Gaba the carry have. The pains on my leg were al gav kafa regel. In other words, in order to put on shoes, the bottom of your foot has to take the shoes, but the bottom of my foot was in pain. I couldn't put on the shoes. Ibailach lemirma sandal. Rafram says you could have put on a sandal, which is wider and doesn't cause pain. Amalei Ravina says urkama demaya havi be'uch. There was a pool of water on the road, and I couldn't pass through it with my sandalim on. So Rafram turns to Ravina, and he says, "Iboilach lemavre derech malbush." Okay, so you have a pool of water on the way, but so what? You're not carrying the sandals. You're wearing, and what you wear is called derech malbush. So Ravina answers, "Lo savar le'mar lahodiam Ravashi." Didn't we just learn in the name of Ravashi that sandal lechatchila lo yavar? You should not travel. Well, I shouldn't say travel, but walk through water with your sandalim. We're afraid that maybe it'll fall off your foot, and you'll carry it in Rishus Harabah. Now, this is a little bit strange because this sugya is about Ravina. And the Gemara says earlier, Amar Rav Richume Anoch Hasisil Ravina Diamar Derma. He wasn't afraid that maybe he'll carry his sandal. So this is the question of Tosfos Yishanim. V'lo Ravina Atzmo Savar Shemuto Lavar B'mayim B'Sandolo Kefi Sheheyed Rechumi Liel Lama Hichmer Al Atzmo L'Lav B'Shlusa Mayim B'Sandol K'nei Lagilu Trososo Shal Reish Kalusa. So Tosfos Yishanim answers Shema Yesh Lavi Mikan Raya Shnei Ravina. This is not the same Ravina. Or alternatively, Shekavanas Ravina Kano Yisachach L'Tchosa, that he didn't really mean it seriously. He was just trying to explain why he didn't show up in the drasha, but in truth, he held it was mutter to wear the sandalim through the water. The Meiri writes that Ravina Chazar, he changed his mind, he rescinded his original position, and now he's worried about Rav Ashi, who paskin that Asur Yesh Lesar San.
The word you're looking for in English is called a poodle.
Puldor?
Poodle.
How do you spell that?
Poodle.
Oh, a poodle of water.
Yeah.
Oh, interesting. When I came from, a poodle was a little dog. I guess I guess the word poodle could mean different things.
Yeah.
I like it, a poodle of water. Yeah, I think I heard of that.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Now, Yesh Sovereign, there are those who are of the opinion, as we saw the testimony of Rav Rechumi with regard to Ravina, who went into the water with his sandal, And the truth is, how do you rely on that story about Ravina when A, Rav Ashi disagreed with him, and number two, as we said in the name of the Meiri, that Ravina himself rescinded his position. And after he heard about Rav Ashi's Kumra, he himself was Choshesh. So the Torah Menachem says that the Isser of Lotzeis Besandal is only Lechatchila before you go out to the road. So if you're going out on the road and you know that you're going to come to a poodle, then you're not allowed to wear your sandal in. But the evidence for Yotzal Derech says the Torah Menachem, he's already on the road and he didn't know there would be a poodle there, or he thought he would get past the poodle before Shabbos begins, before entrance. Is then under those circumstances, mutal olav b'mayim b'sandal. He's allowed to pass through the water wearing his sandal. So it comes out that even Ravina agrees, he concedes that you're not allowed to go through the water with sandal lechatchila. And the case where he himself went out with sandal, that was in one of those scenarios of b'di'evet. And Rav Rechubi, who testified about Ravina, was testifying about what he saw with his eyes, that Ravina actually went through the water wearing his sandals. He didn't know that this was a b'di'evet situation where he had no choice because he had left his house without realizing that he would have this encounter with a poodle of water. Now, as far as Rechitza on Yom Kippurim is concerned, what happens if he washes himself in liquids other than water? Honey, we have a brayso of Yehuda bar Grogros. Osur leishev al gabi tina b'Yom Kippurim. You're not allowed to sit on fresh, moist concrete that hasn't solidified yet on Yom Kippurim, because the moisture of the tint is something that he gets pleasure from, and it's like the tainug of rechitza. Again, even though it doesn't clean up his body like rechitza would, but he gets the tainug, the pleasure from the moisture on his body, that he gets on his body because he sat on the tint. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, that only applies betina mitapachas. In other words, the concrete is moist, and it's so moist that you're getting moisture coming out of the concrete. So let me just read to you the note here. He says, sorry. Now, I call it concrete, like wet concrete. He has a different word for it in the English translation. He calls it mud. The moisture of the mud, he says, affects a pleasure similar to that of washing. And the brayso says, Rabbi Shimon Levi speaks about mud that oozes moisture. What's considered oozing moisture, and therefore it's prohibited. You're not allowed to sit on this mud on Yom Kippur. It's moist to the degree that it can give whatever it touches the capacity to moisture something else. That's called tofeach al manas lehatpia. All right, so let's make a note of where we got up to here on Daf Ayin Ches Amud Aleph. Omar Rabbi Yehuda Muta, etc. Okay, then that's where we'll stop. And I wish you a great Shabbos. Again, as far as Sunday is concerned, we'll be in touch. I'm hoping that we're not going to get out until around noontime on Sunday. And if there's any change, I'll let you know. Have a Shabbat Shalom.